supremacy, as a matter of truth, of primitive, tribal cultures over the individualism of the modern market economy. One influential variant of postmodernism is deconstructivism, which claims, among other things, that literary texts have no inherent meaning or merit, and that the reader's interpretation is as valid as the author's stated intent. This sort of nonsense may seem shocking to common sense, but it's taught routinely in universities around the Western world, including New Zealand. Gary Hull, Professor of Philosophy at the University of California, Fullerton, author of Contemporary Philosophy, A Report from the Black Hole, says we need to examine the causes of postmodernism itself.
The immediate cause of this movement comes out of the 60s liberals, who, as most people know, were claimed to be champions of toleration and accepting everybody else's viewpoint and being open to all opinions and persuasions. But ultimately, this cause goes back to the philosophy of the 20th century, and the final cause of this whole movement is a often little-known German philosopher from the 18th century whose name is Immanuel Kant. He's the one who is really responsible for starting the idea that people ought to run their lives ultimately not by reason but by their emotions. And the 60s liberals and now their final progeny, the PC movement of the 90s, is simply cashing in on this idea that emotions and feelings are taken as some sort of primary.
So what role then would some of the lesser figures of modern philosophy, people like Richard Rorty and Jacques Derrida, where do they fit into this equation of political correctness, emotionalism, and so on?
Well, the two you mentioned, one is an American philosopher, that's Richard Rorty. The other one's a French philosopher, Jacques Derrida. Rorty is one of the major spokesmen for a kind of new approach to pragmatism in the United States, and Derrida is one of the fathers of a French or continental approach to philosophy, which is called deconstruction. These two are really just offshoots. You know, they're the final inroad of a Kantian approach to philosophy. The reason that they're responsible for political correctness is because of their view that, of Derrida's view, for instance, that you can't know anything with certainty, that there is no inherent meaning in anything. The only way that you can figure out what something means is by kind of looking at your own feelings. You know, whatever emotions you bring to a text or to a situation, then that's what that thing means. Now, Rorty's got basically the same approach. He just rejects objectivity completely and says, well, just do whatever works in a given situation. And if forbidding some form of speech on campus is what works to mollify, some campus thugs or some campus Marxists, then that's what you have to do in the name of his philosophy. It's no accident that the PC movement comes out of the universities and that it comes out of the American universities because German philosophy has been dominating the American colleges for at least 100 or 150 years. Now, the PC movement, the rank and file members of the PC movement, like, I don't know, political science professors or the campus activist types, I doubt very seriously if they would be aware of their own philosophic origins because, given their agenda, they're not very much aware of abstract ideas at all. I mean, they have no respect for broad abstractions or for philosophy. All they know is that they feel angry towards somebody and they're venting it against those who do have the jobs or who have power and control. This movement is simply the result of a decades-long assault on reason as man's defining faculty and on reason as the common element amongst all individuals. And I mean, the only way to answer this question is, at the present time, emotionalism is winning. It's in full weed or bloom, whatever you want to call it. And any sense of objectivity or of logic or of independent thought is derided. In fact, the PC movement openly derides objectivity and reason, and they call it a logic of domination. That was the Western culture's approach to science and to the humanities and to business, and they claim that by its nature Western civilization is racist and sexist And so therefore objectivity along with Western civilization has to be thrown out. Now they have only one thing to turn to once you throw out reason, and that is feelings or whims or emotions, which they embrace openly.
Professor of Philosophy Gary Hull. A typical example of the presence of deconstructivism in New Zealand universities is Victoria University's course in literary criticism. The following testimony has been supplied by a former student who wishes to remain anonymous. This is not his voice.
At Victoria University and at other universities around New Zealand, a course called Literary Criticism is offered to students of English literature. At Victoria, this is run as part of the BA Honours or MA programs. The course aims to introduce the student to the notion that there is no such thing as a right or wrong interpretation of a literary text, and also introduce the student to current critical approaches to literature. Students on this course are not required to consider whether a given text has any merit or not. Rather, they are asked to consider whether it is even possible to define literature. One class was asked to seriously debate the issue of whether Shakespeare's shopping list would constitute literature. Within the literary criticism movement, there are such schools of thought as new criticism and new criticism. Some of the theorists have a particular hobby horse, and, to use a favourite word of literary criticism exponents, deconstruct texts to reveal alleged subliminal messages of sexism and or anti-Marxism. One feminist theorist, who was held in high esteem at Victoria, had rewritten a text by a male author and substituted vulgarisms for all references to women in the story. She claimed that she had decoded his subconscious misogyny. Students at Victoria are asked to seriously consider the proposition that the author is dead, figuratively speaking, and that it is the reader and not the author who controls the text's meanings. The author's opinion or intent about what he or she writes is deemed unreliable and frequently irrelevant. The author may think he is writing, say, a novel about slavery, but the reader knows better. The course is a bewildering and disconcerting experience for many students. At the end of the course's exam one year, several students were seen leaving the exam room in tears. Having been taught throughout the year about the infinite possibilities of interpretation, students are not a little surprised to discover the existence of an absolute at the end of the course, their assessor's grade for their year's work. It should be pointed out that literary criticism is by no means embraced by all staff in English departments. Students at Victoria are conscious of two distinct camps, those so-called traditionalists, the self-described dinosaurs who study a text's merit, and those followers of literary criticism who primarily concern themselves with elevating the critic to the same status as the author. A few years ago, one of these so-called traditionalists succeeded in having the literary criticism course disregarded in the assessment of one student whose marks in all courses except literary criticism were of a high standard. This occurred in spite of strong objections from the two lecturers of Lit Crit. "Call me old-fashioned if you like," said the traditionalist to the student in question, "but some of us around here still believe that the author exists."
The postmodern view that there is no objective truth, that anyone's version of anything is therefore as valid as anyone else's, has a bizarre corollary in our tertiary institutions, the proposition that students know as much, or as little, as their tutors, except, of course, about racism and sexism. Another Metro writer, Vincent Heeringer, spent a year training to be a teacher at the School of Secondary Teachers' Education in Auckland, where he was told by one tutor that all men were rapists and all Europeans were racists. A less absolutist view, however, was apparently taken on other issues.
Well, that time we were talking about the educated person. That's a good subject, and that's worthwhile discussing, and it's precisely the sort of thing I wanted to discuss at teachers' training. And so I was looking forward to this section. It was towards the end of the year, and it was a 2-hour class. And the way it was conducted was fairly typical of the way that we went about things at the college. We were formed into groups, and the groups had to produce a poster summarising the educated person. We thought we'd take the mickey, probably because we were bored more than anything else. So we said that the educated person obviously is someone who speaks non-sexist Latin and someone who enjoys a good whipping every now and then. And when we stood up to present this to the class, there were a few laughs, and